What's going on is another day. I'm just trying to live my life. And let's talk about porn and how it's just fucking up masculinity all around the road, and how it's just rewiring men's brains and the benefits to stopping. It's only going to take me about 5 minutes to explain. If you don't got 5 minutes, just keep on doing your thing, keep on jerking off, keep on fapping, and wondering why you're stagnant and stuck and not making any progress. But no, on a serious note, like for me, I realized I needed to make a change. I needed to stop. My addiction to porn got so bad that I even started paying for sex workers online. And, it kept me at a low frequency, kept me at a low vibration. Whenever I would get accused of some shit, I was being overreactive. It even caused me to be more toxic, and it caused me to have a toxic relationship because I couldn't stop. I couldn't contain my urges, and I just let the devil win. Temptation was always there, and I just allowed it to win. And it is a battle, and there's so many other men out there like myself who have been struggling, and I've struggled with it for as long as I can remember. And I realized it's a deep-rooted issue. Once I was able to get down to the bottom of it, that it was a deep-rooted issue, and how I needed to learn forgiveness. I needed to learn to let go. I was able to stop. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a challenge. And my addiction got so bad, like I said, I got involved. Well, I didn't say this part, but I got involved into the sex industry, and I'm not proud of it. Last thing I want to do is bring my girl into that shit. But the reason why I bring that up is because with that, I was on board with it, because she didn't even have to be nice to these dudes. She didn't even have to flirt with these dudes. Dudes was paying just to be humiliated. And I had some shit that I was into that I was ashamed of, but these dudes was on a whole other level. And I realized then, it's like, oh shit, so this really is a deep-rooted issue. Like, these dudes really got something wrong with them, just like myself. I had something wrong with me, and it's a problem that I couldn't stop. And you got to really get to the bottom of it. You got to get to the bottom of what's really holding you back, and what are you holding on to. And for me, it's something that I was going to, after my car accident. Porn was always there. It's like a girlfriend. Whether you're in a bad mood, whether you're in a good mood, even when you're in a happy mood, porn is always there, and temptation is always winning. And you just got to stay out of that frequency, because I realized my relationship has been toxic because I couldn't stop these patterns. And obviously it's common sense, I should have known better, but I just couldn't control my urges. And it kept me at a low frequency, and it made me more overreactive, especially when somebody came at me. It made me overreact. It made me even toxic to a degree. And I'm not proud of the way I reacted. I'm not proud of the way I handled myself, and it caused me to even self-sabotage on a whole other level. And I don't want anybody to get to the point where I got to, where they're that ashamed because they can't stop, and they don't know how to stop, and they don't know any way else how to stop. And it caused me to do some bad things that I'm not so proud of. And when I stopped, I realized, obviously it wasn't easy. That shit was hard. It was I've overcome some addictions, but this is by far was one of the hardest addictions for me to overcome. And I realized that, it gave me more clarity. My mind is more in control. And not only that, I'm not allowing temptation to win. I'm more in control of my thoughts. And not only am I in control of my thoughts, I'm in control of my urges. And it's just having the self-control, and not constantly having your mind in the gutter, not constantly being in sit mode. Because I know, like myself, I didn't want to be stuck in that mode. I didn't want to be stuck at that low frequency. I didn't want to be stuck in that vibration. But it just kept me there. And the more and more that I did it, the more and more I consumed, the more stuck that it made me feel. And I'm not even gonna lie, I even feel hopeless, because I wanted to stop, I just didn't know how to stop. And my book down below, I share my story. I share how I've overcome my stuff, and how I made some poor choices, how I self-sabotage on a whole other level. And the last thing I want to do is bring others down there with me, which I did. And a lot of it was because I allowed porn to take over my life. And I'm not proud of it. And I feel like people can learn from my story. So it's down below if anybody's interested. But, I made some poor choices. And, I got to live with it for the rest of my life. But I do realize the benefits there are to stopping, And I do realize that change is possible. Even if you have been watching porn for over 10 plus years, porn change is possible, and there's so much benefits to semen retention. And if you don't know anything about semen retention, I'll tell you that it can like really be a spiritual thing. Like your lust battle can be a spiritual thing, and fighting that devil, fighting those temptations can really elevate your level of consciousness when you stop. So like I highly suggest that you guys get to the bottom of it and realize what your problem is actually a deep-rooted issue, and you really need to get to the bottom of that. And once you actually realize why you keep going back to it, why do you keep repeating these patterns, that's when the change can happen. And it's not going to be easy. You know, you're going to need help, you're going to need guidance, you're going to need to really be in control, and I promise you that it's possible. So if anybody want to continue this, we can continue it next time. So I'll see y'all. Salute.